Well, hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with NICE, Auscontact's national gold sponsor, and it's entitled Enlighten AI, Customer Vulnerability, Care and Compliance. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of countries throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So the webinar will run for about 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guest, a very familiar voice, Cameron Adams, we hope to spark your interest and engage you in the conversation, as well as provide you with some ideas to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the session, we'll be having a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and you do need to stay around for that Q&A. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact, and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to quickly run through some housekeeping. Remember, it's important to interact with us to maximise the benefit. And as you know, there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with a recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Cameron or myself from time to time. Remember, we will be having a full Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type your questions as we go along so you don't forget to ask them, and there might be something in it for those of you that ask questions. If you're listening through headphones or speakers and experience any issues with your internet connection, please note that on the control panel, you can click the raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid. Or you can actually revert to your registration confirmation email, and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes are there available for you to use. Now, I know that many of you are familiar with asking questions, but let's try the Q&A button on the control panel now, just in case. And the question for today, as always, is a trick question, and it is: name one of the capital cities in Australia in lockdown at the moment. Now, I'm not in one of those capital cities because I've had a haircut this week. So I'm very excited. Okay, so we've got lots of northerners here. Lots of people from the north here. Couple from middle ground. So guys, obviously you all know how to use it. So the answers are either Brisbane or Sydney. And to those people who are in lockdown, I have to say, my heart absolutely goes out to you. I'm actually in Port Stephens at the moment, so I'm a little bit of a lucky one. So with that, you know how I was talking about asking questions? Well, this is where it's super important. You need to ask us a question for a chance to win a savvy 8220 UC Bluetooth stereo headset. And the winner is going to be announced after the webinar. You'll actually get an email confirming who the winner is, but make sure you ask a question and you stay on, because we'll be ensuring that's the case. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back our speaker for today, a very familiar voice to Auscontact, Cameron Adams, Director, Solution Consulting at NICE. And it's over to you, Cam.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you to all of you joining us this afternoon. I was really kind of interested by this topic. We've been discussing it for a few months because as we look out in the press and we look out at society at the moment, customer vulnerability is something that is more and more topical, seemingly with every passing day. It's something that has been part of the kind of dialogue for many years now, organizations thinking about how to do the right thing by vulnerable customers. But of course, the pandemic has thrown this into sharp relief, like so many other things. And what we see, and I'm sure that you've seen as well, is that vulnerability, whilst it's something that's often considered in the financial services sector in particular, actually is something that touches really every vertical, and I'm sure that you're grappling with it yourselves in your industry. Everything from energy companies to retail to telco, as well as, of course, financial services. All industries face a few different challenges with customer vulnerability. The most obvious one is reputational, right? You can see a few headlines here from news articles that have been about vulnerable customers just in the last sort of 2-3 weeks. But of course, it's a customer satisfaction issue. All of us may be vulnerable at some point in our lives and in some part of our customer journey. So thinking about customer vulnerability should be an intrinsic part of thinking about customer satisfaction. And what we're, of course, also seeing is that it is increasingly a compliance issue as regulators start to pay more attention to the fair treatment of vulnerable customers. And what do I mean by vulnerable customers anyway? One of those jurisdictions where more regulatory attention is occurring is in the UK, where for a number of years, the Financial Conduct Authority has published articles, discussion papers, and so on about customer vulnerability and fair treatment in the financial services sector of the UK. They say vulnerability can come in a range of guises and can be temporary, sporadic, or permanent in nature. So that's not just things like physical or intellectual disability or older customers or those with caring responsibilities, but also transient circumstances like financial difficulties, changes in situations like a bereavement or divorce, and even language skills and access to telecommunications services and so on. So there really are a very broad range of different ways that customers can be vulnerable. And in the earlier part of this year, in February, the Financial Conduct Authority published some guidelines in the UK to start to be more prescriptive about the way that vulnerable customers should be looked after. And I believe that it's really only a matter of time before we see similar regulatory attention here in Australia, and indeed it may come to be more prescriptive at some stage. But of course, as that guidance becomes firmer or even obligatory, it creates challenges in organisations who want to do the right thing, because it's actually quite hard to understand the nature of customer vulnerability within your customer base. And understanding is where it all begins. Most of the organizations that I talk to who have policies and procedures around this, and most of them do, look for customer vulnerability as part of their quality assurance process. So it's done as a manual listening exercise, which gets to usually a very, very small proportion of calls, maybe a statistically valid sample though. And when we look at that sample, we see that they identify perhaps 1% of total calls as displaying vulnerability. That's what we saw at least with a debt collection customer of ours. And it can be a very subjective thing, quite hard to define, maybe difficult for organizations to be sure that one assessor is picking up on those signals of vulnerability in the same way that another is, so that you can be confident in your measurement. And indeed, it's very hard to be sure that bankers and advisors and customer service representatives are picking up on those cues as well. Customers may not identify themselves as vulnerable. In fact, in many cases, they won't. May not even consider themselves to be vulnerable. But as I say, it does represent a reputational risk. It represents a risk to customer satisfaction, fair treatment of customers, and even, as I say, a compliance risk. So what we have been able to do over the sort of 6 months of the start of this year is to build some vulnerability detection models that are aligned with the 5 categories of vulnerability that the FCA has identified in the UK. And those are capability vulnerability, that is hearing issues, literacy, and so on. Health, whether that's disability, long-term illness, so physical health, and likewise mental health, depression, and so on. And then life events, as I said before, like divorce or bereavement, and resilience, like financial distress. So we've built some models to help us measure when customers display potentially some behaviours that indicate they may fall into one of these categories. So that's quite interesting. And when we've used these in the UK, which is where we first developed them, we were able to identify vulnerability in a larger proportion of calls in that debt collector. And we saw somewhere up to 8% of calls. Now, how do you actually measure these things anyway? In the past, it would have been a job for, if we were looking for a technology solution, would have been a job for a traditional analytics platform to try to solve by looking for specific words or particular phrases that people might have been talking about that suggest they may be vulnerable. And of course, you could look to find out about what some of those words and phrases are by interviewing quality assessors or contact center agents and so on. But the reality is that an approach like that provides an incomplete view, because it's very difficult to define an attribute like vulnerability or the behaviors that may manifest from that attribute through specific words and terms that people use, right? Even if you ask those assessors who are trying to measure it, they might struggle to put a finger on exactly what it is. So these approaches of a kind of black and white measurement from older analytics tools don't quite get there. They're sort of one size fits all, and they don't quite do the job. So we think that this sort of problem is best served by an AI-driven analytics approach, which means that we're able to make measurements on behaviors and understand personalities in order to really get a better grasp on people's circumstances, and do this across all of the channels that you might be serving your customers on. So let me get into just a touch more about what I mean by AI-driven analytics and why that's different and how that applies in this situation. Again, many of the organizations that I talk to, particularly in financial services, particularly in telecommunications, are already doing a lot of work with modern machine learning technologies, and many of them have data science practices and are already spending a lot of time curating data sets, training machine learning models in order to identify phenomena or behaviors that are interesting to them. And your organization may certainly be doing the same. But NICE is in a bit of an unusual position to be able to make a contribution here for 3 main reasons. Bit of a point of trivia: over 1 trillion interactions per year are either routed, recorded, or analysed by a NICE application. And what that means is that through collaboration with customers and customers of ours, we have access to very, very large data sets. And for those of you who have kind of spent some time around data science and machine learning, you know that data is the essential ingredient for being able to do this kind of stuff. And We've also been around customer experience in particular, and financial crime and compliance for, let me think about it, 37 years. And what that means is that we've got significant domain expertise about what should we be looking for, how should we be thinking about those data sets, and how should we be validating the outcomes of those. And then speaking of outcomes, we also offer a range of different ways to put insight and outcomes into practice, because NICE provides some of the technologies that support crucial functional aspects of contact center and customer experience functions, from routing interactions to connect people together, through to assuring the quality and the performance of the people involved in those transactions, through to planning for those people, really the tools that help drive operational change at the end of the day. So a couple of years ago, we looked at this position that we stand in and thought we need to start building some collaborations with our customers to start really making new machine learning, AI-driven measurements around things that organizations should be caring about and measuring. So we did that. We did that in 2019. We really kicked this off in earnest, working with organizations in the US and in the UK to collaborate on curated training sets, to collaborate on the types of problems that need to be solved, and to align the technologies with those problems and the data to create a machine that can analyze every single interaction, both when it's finished and even while it's unfolding, and to do that in a consistent way and without human bias. So that's what we set out to do. And we're there now. We've really done a lot of work with sort of 7 or 8 very large firms across a range of different verticals to build comprehensive AI tools for customer engagement. Now, back to vulnerability. Those 5 models that I talked about are some of the out-of-the-box models that we've worked on and validated and now have productized over the course of the last couple of years. For interest, some of the others are around things like pure customer satisfaction. So are contact center agents demonstrating the right behaviours during interactions that will lead to a satisfied customer at the end of the day, like showing empathy, acknowledging loyalty, and building rapport, and so on, things that are probably part of your quality assessment process. And then other models around things like detecting and managing complaints or propensity to churn and so on. But on the vulnerability side in particular, we have these 5 models. They are aligned around the UK, the FCA definitions of vulnerability. And what that means is that we have a mechanism to be able to measure or detect a potential customer vulnerability on every single interaction that is handled by a contact center, whether it's a voice conversation or whether it's a digital messaging type interaction. And that's crucial. Once you can measure something, once you can detect it, then you have an opportunity to understand, are my products aligned correctly to be able to support vulnerable customers? You know, I think about segmenting my customers into age groups and, you know, wealth segments and geographies and so on. Am I considering the vulnerable customer segment effectively? And we can assess this by seeing how products are received and how processes function, if we can detect when vulnerable customers are having conversations. So that measurement is absolutely key. But of course, as I said before, it's actually about how you drive change in your organization? How do you drive operational outcomes from those measurements? And we help with that in a couple of different ways. One of those ways is by building these productized models into the core of our cloud CX platform, which is CX1. We've recognized the value of being able to measure agent and customer behaviors in many different aspects of the ways that interactions are handled. As I say, from connecting people together to assuring quality, performance, planning, and so on. So we sort of built these models right into the middle of CX1. But we also expose them on top of any other contact center platform using our NICE Nexidia Analytics suite. And NICE Enlighten, connected to Quality Central, connected to more traditional approaches to interaction analytics that might be able to detect, specific presence or absence of terms, what we call discrete analysis, gives you a very, very complete kind of view on the interactions that are going through your contact center and an ability to influence some change on those. So as I say, we sort of pump these vulnerability models through our CX1 platform, and we put them through our dedicated analytics and quality platform as well. Now, what does that actually mean in terms of outcomes? Well, again, once we can make measurements of behaviors on every interaction, we can expose that to the front line and line management in a number of different ways. One of them is to support coaches and supervisors so that a coach for a contact center agent has quick access to a behavioral dashboard for each agent where every single call has been analyzed by the platform for particular behaviors and attributes. And so instead of having to spend lots of time manually listening to calls, hunting down those examples to use in coaching conversations, suddenly it's really easy to identify specific interactions where potentially, there might be some characteristics that suggest a mental health challenge or a capability challenge with a customer's interaction. And then by being able to quickly find that and listen to it, can have more effective conversations about the way that those interactions are handled with people. And indeed, these things roll up as metrics, right? So the coach has a much easier job of identifying which agents are finding it easier or are more able to handle these interactions effectively than others, so that they know where to spend their time and energy. So that's one of the ways that we can expose this sort of data, get it out to supervisors, coaches, team leaders, quality assessors, so that we've got a view on every single interaction for every agent. By the way, that does, of course, mean that it's possible for a coach to see improvement or decline in a particular individual's performance on a short time scale. Because we're measuring every single call, it's actually possible to see over the course of 3 or 4 weeks, is somebody changing the way that they handle these calls? You just can't do that with a traditional approach to quality where you're only getting a few calls a month per agent. We then, of course, can expose this information at a more aggregate level so that contact center managers, people who are responsible for the fair treatment of vulnerable customers, people in compliance divisions, can get a view on how's my agent population on the whole handling these types of inquiries. Are they doing it effectively and fairly, and rolling that information up at a site level? That can also help in situations where perhaps one part of the organization might be in-house as far as the contact center goes, but others might be outsourced to different BPOs, can help ensure that organizations providing those outsourced services are doing the right thing. And indeed, what I haven't got a screenshot to show is where we can identify interactions where there's particularly potentially poor performance. Those can be automatically identified as part of a workflow that will push those interactions through to a triage group who can then assess it and do something about it if necessary. So that's as relevant for customer vulnerability as it is for potentially complaint management or other compliance issues. And then the last way that we can take advantage of this new approach to making measurements is in real time with agents in the moment that the conversation is being had. So this is quite interesting. The technology that we've got both in CX1 and in the analytics platform, Exterior Analytics, that I talked about, enables us not only to transcribe every conversation as it unfolds to text. That's great and useful and helps us spot terms and potentially prompt agents if they should be, being careful from a compliance standpoint, or there might be an upsell opportunity. But not only can we spot words and phrases on the transcript in real time, what we also can do is calculate these Enlighten AI model scores in real time so that we're looking at the conversation in a kind of holistic way and calculating a score that is indicative of displayed behaviours. And that means if we deploy customer vulnerability models in real time, agents might be prompted with some guidance as that conversation unfolds once we reach a particular score threshold to say, hey, consider that you might need to treat this customer with special care or follow our customer vulnerability process because it looks like they may have vulnerable characteristics. And so this can help agents who may, sometimes miss the cues or may just need a little bit of help with prompting to course correct while the conversation's actually in progress. By the way, for those of you who are thinking about how this might plug into a broader ecosystem, all of this data is available in real time from an integration point of view. So if you've got the big data platforms or real-time insight platforms, we can sort of push those model scores and transcripts and so on into those as well, if that will help. So these are really the different ways that we can surface this new sort of set of measurements around customer characteristics. We can do it in real time for supervisors in aggregate and for compliance workflows. And by the way, we would love to show you how this works using your own data. So I just kind of want to leave you with that thought a little bit. We love running proofs of concept and we love doing them without necessarily any financial commitment on your part. We know that the vulnerability models that we've built are aligned around those UK definitions of vulnerability, and of course were built for the UK market. We have found that these international models in many cases work very well in Australia, but can also need a little bit of tuning. And we're up for doing that as well, whether it's as part of a POC process or whether it's as part of a deployment. So just something to think about. We would love to, think about running a business case workshop, developing a charter, which agrees what we would do together and getting some data together. We'd need some data from you to do this. And then actually run some of these models over your own data, share some of those sort of results during a checkpoint review, and then give you a read back of what were we able to find with your data and, demonstrate the value of making measurements in this way. So that was what I kind of wanted to share with you just as a final thought. We have plenty of time for questions this afternoon. So thank you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so that we can have a bit more of a face-to-face chat. But don't forget, I hope I've got a few questions in there. Hope you've got a question ready because if you'd like one of those headsets, that's your ticket to entry. So feel free to fire away, Fiona.
Indeed, and thanks everyone for all the questions that are coming through, and thank you, Cam. While you've been talking and I've been judging overseas contact centres, and this has been a really hot topic, vulnerable customers, and it's really, really on the money. So we've got some great questions. So let's kick off with Julia's question. Does domestic abuse or violence feature in the UK model?
It's a great question, and I'm not 100% certain of the answer. So I would like to go and check that out for you. I think it does, but I would like to take that away and get back to you in an email follow-up, if that's okay.
That's fine. That's great. Nicole has the question that was on the tip of my tongue, which is, will the reporting pick up on not just the customer's vulnerability, or will it pick up the agent's vulnerability as well?
That's a great question. We do separate customer and agent utterances in our transcript, so we can actually target one side of the conversation or both with these models. So if we needed to try to exclude phenomena from agents, we could do that. We normally just apply the models to the mix. So I guess, it's possible that if we apply it that way, then it could pick up on agent vulnerability as well. But if we need to be able to kind of rule that out, we can do that too.
Thank you, because I know with people working from home, particularly in Sydney and Brisbane at the moment, and on and off again for poor Melbourne, over time, what's typically been happening, especially in DV circumstances, is they've been using safe words to let people know. And I just wonder if you can pick up earlier where you might have a staff member potentially.
Yeah, that's really true. And, as I was giving that answer, I was sort of thinking, well, hey, maybe there's some merit in targeting just the agent side as well if you needed to have an angle on looking after the health and welfare of staff.
Absolutely. There are so many people that are in those circumstances that don't share overtly. They're not necessarily comfortable with that. And I think Kylie might have had an extra comment on that. Okay, we'll come back to Kylie. Heine would like to know, will Enlighten AI also offer follow-up feedback like real-time personalised surveys that feel like a natural conversation?
Yes, actually. Have you been reading our website? Yes. This is something that we think Enlighten has a great possibility to help with, and that is having a more natural conversation when collecting customer feedback. So Enlighten powered customer feedback is absolutely something that we have in the market today with our both CX1 feedback management product and our standalone SAPmetrics product. So yeah, spot on, definitely.
Perfect. A very simple question from Dominic. Is there a hosted option?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it occurs to me that I haven't talked about how any of this stuff is actually delivered, so I probably should. We tend to provide cloud solutions these days. So both from CX1 point of view, which is our cloud contact center platform, that's cloud, that's only cloud. From a Nexidia Analytics point of view, we tend to look to the cloud first. We host our cloud instances of Nexidia Analytics in Sydney, here in Australia, so that data doesn't leave the country in a PCI compliant environment, so we can actually even handle cardholder data if you've got that. Now, that said, if you need to have an installation on premise because of it's data sensitivity or any other challenges, that's something we can definitely do with the Nexidia Analytics platform. So that's a long way of saying yes, there is a cloud-hosted option.
Thanks, Cam. This is a question as well. How do agents respond to this level of monitoring when implemented?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so I'm going to use a slightly different example from vulnerability for this one, and I'm going to talk instead about customer satisfaction. Remember when I threw those models up, I said there were sort of 8 models around agent behaviours that contribute to customer satisfaction. So I'm going to give a really long-winded answer to this one, sorry. We worked with a very large telco in the US to help them transform their quality program and the way that they assessed agent behaviours. So this goes right to this question, how did the agents respond, right? Because we really changed the way that they were being measured. And the reason why they did that, the reason why this organisation did that was they said, let's get rid of our old checklist quality form. NPS is our North Star. We're going to rejig our quality assessments so that we're checking for key behaviours that we know lead to great outcomes for customers at the end of the day. And first of all, they were doing that manually. So they were assessing these behaviours manually with their sort of several hundred quality management staff, many thousands of agents, and they had problems. They were struggling to get better than 70% agreement from a calibration point of view, and they were only getting to 2 to 3 interactions a month per agent. And so actually, with that more traditional quality process, they found agents were quite dissatisfied with the process as it stood when it was manual. They felt it was subjective. They felt they got dinged on a bad call and then they couldn't get their scores up over a performance period. They didn't love it. So we worked with that organisation to build those models around those behaviours from curated data sets so that now we could start measuring them on every interaction. And displaying them in the dashboards like you saw before, and really helping to kind of coach on those behaviours and measure them all the time. And actually the agents loved it. They absolutely loved it because they felt that it was much more objective. We collaborated to spend a lot of time to validate the outputs of those models and ensure they were giving good, consistent, valid scores. And that meant really the subjectivity went out of the equation. And it didn't matter if you had a customer, one bad customer call, right? Because it all comes out in the wash when you're measuring it on every single call. So the agents absolutely loved it. The coaches loved it. That company saved heaps of money on sending feedback surveys because they didn't need to survey everyone so much anymore. And yeah, that was a great outcome. So you might be surprised, agents actually like the reduction in subjectivity and the increase in data.
Perfect. So Kylie, just for a change of pace, Cam, would like to know, for the Enlighten vulnerability models, what level of accuracy would you say they have without tweaking for industry or country? And does the same apply to other models as well, apart from soft skills?
Yeah, super good question. So I couldn't put a number on the accuracy for the vulnerability models for Australia, and the reason is because we haven't tried them out on Australian data just yet. We would love to. If that's Kylie Bullock from IAG, then I think we're going to be doing a bit of a trial. So let's do it. Let's try it out. And then we can find out the accuracy. That said, on the customer satisfaction models, we've found them to be they work really well. We tried them out with a financial services organisation here in Australia without tuning them, and we found again I haven't got the numbers off the top of my head, but it was really very satisfactory accuracy for the customer satisfaction models without any tuning. I'll see if I can get some numbers for you, Kylie. But yeah, for vulnerability, we need to try it out.
And Kylie said, yes, it is Kylie, yes, from IAG.
You.
So there you go. She's revealed herself.
Good. Sorry for revealing you in advance.
Keep the questions coming, guys. If we don't get to them during the webinar, I know Cam will come back to you afterwards. And it does still keep you in the running for the Savvy 822.0 UC Bluetooth stereo headset. So keep them coming. We love it. Love the interaction. So Deepak would like to know, how does semantics or language nuances come into the identification process? Yeah,
good question. And it's actually a very deep question, and I could get really geeky about this. I'll try not to go too nerdy.
A little propeller.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But semantics and language nuances are actually everything about the way that these models work, because in when we're looking to score conversations, and we're trying to do that with machine learning models, what we do is we identify what we call features of those conversations. This is the machine learning terminology. We look for features. And one of the most important features when training models is, again, this is really a bit geeky, it's called word vectors. Now, this is a way of looking at the entire contents of a conversation and understanding the terms in their semantic context. So it's a mathematical approach to measuring the semantic expression of conversations. And so that word vector features, that's kind of how we generate the model scores, along with a few other features. So as I say, measuring the semantics, the language nuances, they're key. That's key to how the models score.
Right, and I guess that kind of works with Australia's habit, shall we say, of being sarcastic. You know, saying that was great or that was great. You know, those kind of things. So I think that's probably answers Diz's next question. However, Jason would like to know: do the models link to the most effective or suitable customer solutions? As the screen shifts in front of me, and does this differ by industry type?
Right. So I guess the question is, how can we use the models to get the right, effective, suitable customer solutions in front of the people who are having that conversation? Now, I might, if I interpret it that way, does it differ by industry type? The models themselves don't do anything but measure, right? They just measure the degree of kind of customer vulnerability or agent behaviors around satisfaction or whatever they are. So then the kind of the next step is, how do I link that to an outcome? How do I use that measurement to bring a solution to the fore? And there are a few different ways we can do that. In that real-time client that I showed you before, we have an ability to trigger, based on model scores or phrases or whatever, trigger off links to knowledge articles, for example, internally, or provide little prompts on process to the agent at their desktop. And that would be a really effective way to connect the model score output with some guidance, some relevant knowledge to the agent in the moment. And by the way, if you don't have a good way of doing knowledge management, we can help with that too. So I would say linking to knowledge and process and so on is an important thing. We would do that predominantly in the real-time context. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks. Rochelle's got a really great question, Cam, and I think it applies to most operations. So can Enlighten actually be used across different channels like digital or live chat?
Yes, it absolutely can. And that's incredibly important, because if there's another thing that the pandemic has exposed, apart from increases in customer vulnerability, it's these massive shifts in the way that we communicate. And in fact, one of the telcos that we work with in the Philippines has only 10% in their contact mix now of voice. 90% is digital. So being able to measure these scores on digital interactions, super duper important, and yes, we can do it.
Cool. So Belle's got a question about she's in financial services, which, as you know, is compliance very, very hamstrung. So do you have any examples where in Australia that you're working with financial services organisations that are actually using this platform today that you might be able to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I can't name the organisation, but I can talk a little bit about the what we do. So there's an organisation that we work with who has a pretty sizable phone-based financial advice practice. So many of you in the audience, I'm sure, have something like this. And what we do for them from a compliance point of view is we help them measure whether or not some of the very black and white aspects of compliance are being followed, like product disclosure statements being discussed, the financial services guide being mentioned, you know, even things around whether identification was performed correctly. And we're also helping them to understand whether those advisors are kind of staying in their lane as far as giving general or personal advice goes. As you know, unless you're accredited, you should not be making specific recommendations for a person's circumstances. That personal advice is only for the right kind of advisor. So we help them understand the risk that someone might have been making a personal recommendation or something like that. Now, we do a lot of that without the benefit of Enlighten. And we're looking with that organization to potentially apply things like the complaint management model to help better identify complaints. So that's kind of down the track a little bit, but yes, we definitely help address the compliance use case.
Well, let's change the topic a little bit. Anne-Marie, we'd like to talk about profanity. And would that be highlighted or flagged as customer vulnerability in AI? Because presently they're reading and scoping profanity as a key indicator or measure to assist the customer.
Right, that's interesting. I can say for sure that the models that we've built have not explicitly kind of been targeting profanity, but they've been looking at those 5 different dimensions of vulnerability. Now, if it were the case that more profanity occurred in one of those categories than in the general population of calls, the model will pick that up. So we don't sort of specifically go after it. Many of our customers do look for that because, you know, even in a more traditional analytics context, it's a good indicator of customer frustration or some sort of issue with the process. So common to look for that, but not so targeted in the models.
Thank you. Dimitri wants to find out whether you've had any feedback from your existing customers based on this solution so far. Have they been able to measure the outcome in terms of customer experience improvement, for example?
Right. So for vulnerability, is very early days. We haven't got a lot of feedback on the impact just yet. We only really just got done building the models a couple of months ago, so they're very, very new. So if I talk instead then about the customer satisfaction models, which have been around for a little bit longer, absolutely great feedback. As I said, from agents and supervisors and so on earlier, I didn't give any numbers though. What that organization found with the CSAT models was they got about a 7-point improvement attributable in NPS, which is substantial. They managed to redeploy a large number of quality FTE to other functions because they didn't have to assess so many calls by hand anymore. And they actually saved, this is funny, you remember I said they don't survey so much anymore because they've got a way of measuring customer satisfaction in the call. They saved millions of dollars over 3 years on their feedback management platform. So great range of benefits actually.
Wow, and that's putting all of those organisations on alert. Yeah. Matthew's just got probably a little bit more of a technical question, but I know you're up for that. He said, from your description, Cam, the machine learning and AI technologies were used to develop the capability. Are they still active and constantly adapting and improving?
Yes, they are. And that's in 2 different ways. So we have constant R&D investment in adapting and improving, obviously version controlled, productized models so that we can continue to, provide the quickest way to start measuring phenomena without you needing to come up with large curated data sets and so on. So that yes, definitely continuous adaptation. But at an individual customer context, we do tweak and tune and measure ongoing the effectiveness of the models in your own context, so that we can ensure that it is right for you. So we're kind of not necessarily, the productized models help us start from a place where we've already made a lot of progress, and then we can just take it that bit further, measure it, tune it, and continue to improve it ongoing in your organization. It's an important part of the process. Actually, just as it is to continue to feed and water any analytics solution, right? You can never just put something in and fire and forget. It always needs that maintenance and care.
Absolutely not a set and forget, because the world moves and customer expectations move quite significantly, in such a short period of time. There is a question around how successful has Enlighten been, or has it been helpful in fraud detection?
Yeah, that's a good one. So that's a slightly different topic, and probably one worth its own webinar. We did some work with a US-based credit card company on fraud detection, and we were very successful in that respect. And the way that we were successful was, so we used actually a number of models, underlying models, to identify potentially fraudulent behaviours from the customer side based on training data sets that we put together. And then within those higher risk interactions, we used our voice biometrics engine to look for the same speaker operating on multiple accounts. And so when we saw that in a high risk bucket, it helped us to identify, this was just in a proof of concept, by the way. I think we identified sort of 50 odd fraudsters out of that pool just in a 2-week proof of concept exercise. It's interesting how you can kind of get a different lens on fraud by looking for those behaviours and looking for the voices.
Yeah, there's still more questions coming, so I'm going to keep our foot to the accelerator.
Right.
So Julie and Julia have asked a very similar sort of question, and it's around, is Enlighten only using the conversation transcript, or is it using phonetic features, or is it looking at tone and intonation in terms of how it does the analytics?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the digital context, we've only got the transcript to go on, and that's it. In a voice context, we do like to add a couple of other things into the mix, which is whether or not people are talking over one another, periods of silence, and laughter detection in the interaction. Those feature into the model training as well. Predominantly, though, it's about what people say. At the end of the day, that's what drives the scores mostly.
Another question from Diz about people. When there's a vast number of different elements that contribute to the agent outcome, the single score, how do you train team leaders or coaches to know what specifically needs to be addressed for improvement?
Yeah, excellent question. It is a tricky one. So the way that we've approached this in a few different customers is to use a machine learning approach and model scores to target behaviors at a kind of more macro level, right? Broad things like, are you relationship building or displaying empathy, or some of those vulnerability things. But then the quality team has worked to identify some specifics that contribute to the outcome that we're looking for, and has built analytics categories or queries around those specifics to empower coaches and leaders with some more granular data to be able to have conversations about particular aspects of the behavior. And so that's the way that we've approached it. Give more measurements and give some guidance to those team leaders and coaches on really what should they be looking for.
Yeah, and I guess the other part of that is, what is the organisation's strategy, and how do you link what you're measuring back to the strategy so that you know where to look for improvement as well, and opportunities. One last formal question, then I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
Because I can. So GPAC would like to know, how many conversations do we need to get to, say, a 95% level of confidence in that, how close to accuracy detecting nuances in customers' conversations in the approach that you have?
Right, that's very specific. I think, so to get to a very high level of confidence in the data, we need probably around 100,000 labeled interactions typically for a model. But as you know, with machine learning, it's kind of garbage in and garbage out. So you need to be very careful about how did those conversations get labeled, and make sure that you don't have any idiosyncrasies in the data that are going to give you some weird outputs of the model. So the curation process is super important too. One lot of 100,000 is definitely not equivalent to another. That's an area of expertise that our R&D team would contribute to, particularly if we're collaborating with you on some models that we might productize.
Fantastic. Oh, there's one sneaky one coming from Deborah. Do you find average handle time, so it's not sneaky because it's from you, Deborah, it's coming on a different channel. Do you find average handle time increases once call centre staff realise all calls are being monitored?
You know what? We haven't seen that. No, we didn't see an increase in average handle time from putting this in anywhere. I can imagine why you might think that could happen, but it's not something we've seen, no.
Okay, so the question for me is, you described a proof of concept and
Yes.
all the key components, which is very exciting. So how do we get onto it?
Great. Good question. Get in touch with me in the first instance. I think that's probably the easiest way. And I'll connect you up with the relevant NICE account manager and our analytics experts to be able to organise that proof of concept. So please get a hold of me, LinkedIn, cameron.adams@nice.com. Very, very happy to help.
I'm sure we'll add something in the follow-up email that'll have the recording, so that people know who to connect with, and maybe just a short description of maybe what we need to make it happen, so that the right permissions can be sought, at least initially, in terms of pursuing, do you need scrub calls, blah, 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 whatever it might be. And of course, compliance being one of the key things. So we're nearly at time, Cam, and I'd just love some closing remarks from you. You've been so generous with answering all of those questions.
No worries. And look, I'm really grateful for the questions from the audience. I think it's awesome that we can have that kind of discussion. I'd love to thank you all once again for your time. I think this is an incredibly exciting space, and one that, particularly in the vulnerability front, is that goes to ethics, to corporate social responsibility, about the way that we care for people, and the better job that we can all do of that. I think the better we feel, and certainly the better off everyone is. So thanks again. Really grateful for the time.
Thanks, Cameron. And thanks, as Cameron said, to everybody that joined us today. Having a sponsor like NICE that's so generous with their information, their time, and just any of those questions that were thrown at Cam today without notice, was just fantastic, the way that he just navigated his way through those. To all of you, I would ask that you stay safe, do what you need to do. Let's just work on this together, and come out the other side, stronger and all the better for what we've managed to get through in 2021, which is proving to be probably flakier than 2020 would be my take on it. So look after yourselves, and see you next time. Thank you.